I have ushered the Aldenmere Charity Hall for 19 years, and in 19 years I had never once seen a King's Guard move from his post during the Founders' Home benefit. Not for the toasts, not for the orchestra, not even the year a donor fainted dead away into the dessert table and the guard nearest the door simply turned his head a fraction and let the staff handle it. They stand at those doors like the gilding itself, fixed, ornamental, permanent. So when Corporal Joran Vass came off his line that night, in front of 400 of the city's wealthiest people, I understood before anyone else in that room that something had broken loose in him, and that it had been a long time coming. The Aldenmere Charity Hall was built 2 centuries ago for state dinners, and it still looks it, vaulted gold ceiling, tall arched windows hung with red drapery, a floor polished so hard it threw back the chandelier light in long white streaks. Once a year the Founders' Home rents it for the benefit, and once a year I watch the same quiet performance happen twice, the children on the stage, and the donors performing being moved by them. The orchestra plays something gentle while the doors open. The director gives the same speech about second chances. Then the children come out, one at a time, in clothes borrowed for the evening, to remind 400 wealthy strangers why the checks are worth writing. The girl's name was Pippa. 9 years old, hair brushed flat and pinned with a ribbon someone at the home had clearly fussed over, standing alone on a stage built for string quartets and award speeches, in a hand-me-down dress a half size too big in the shoulders. She'd been chosen to sing for the donors, one child, plucked each year to put a face on the numbers in the brochure, to remind the room why their checks mattered. I'd watched 6 girls do it before her, going back years. Some sang well. Some didn't. The room always clapped either way, because clapping costs nothing, and because clapping is what lets you go back to your wine with a clean conscience. There's a particular kind of an attention in a room like that. Forks still moving. Low conversation continuing under the music, never quite stopping, the way you'd let a radio play in another room. Pippa had been singing into that, into people half listening, half performing kindness, for almost a full verse before her voice cracked. I remember thinking, even before it happened, that I'd seen this exact moment coming for years and never once been able to do anything about it myself. Ushers don't cross that floor. Nobody does. Pippa got 4 lines into the old hymn they'd taught her and her voice simply stopped working. Not a wrong note, silence. Her mouth kept moving and nothing came out, and you could see her understand, in real time, that 400 strangers in evening dress were watching her fail. The room did what rooms like that do. A ripple of pity dressed up as embarrassment. A few titters, quickly smothered, which somehow land worse than open laughter. Someone's fork clinked against a plate in the new quiet, loud as a gunshot. The girl's hands found each other in front of her and gripped, and her chin started to go, and I have served wine to senators in that hall and watched men ruin each other over land deals, and I have never wanted so badly to walk out of a room myself. Corporal Vass stood at the east doors the whole time, where he always stood, rifle at rest, eyes forward, not a muscle in his face moving. I'd worked enough of these benefits to know the rule even before anyone explained it to me: a King's Guard does not break post for sentiment. Not for a toast in his honor, not for a standing ovation, not for anything short of a blade drawn or a door breached. The discipline is the whole point of him. He is there to be a wall, not a man. 6 years on that line, the duty sergeant told me later, and in 6 years no one had ever seen him so much as shift his weight during a ceremony. I didn't know, watching him that night, what was happening behind that stillness. I learned it afterward, in pieces, from a man who doesn't talk about himself easily. He told me he'd stood through 100 small cruelties in that uniform, slights, mockery, the casual disrespect of people who assumed a man who doesn't react can't feel, and never once moved, because moving wasn't his to choose. But watching that girl's hands knot together in front of her, watching the room's pity curdle into something crueler with every second she stood there exposed, he said it stopped being about the order and started being about a different ledger entirely, one he'd been keeping, without meaning to, since he was younger than she was. Because he knew that stage. Not figuratively. He'd stood on it himself, 8 years old, in a coat 2 sizes too large, the year the home put him up to sing for the donors the way they'd put up every child before and since. His voice had failed him too. The room had laughed before it caught itself, the way rooms do, and no one, not a single soul in evening dress, had come for him. He'd carried that for 20 years inside a uniform built to carry nothing at all, and now here it was again, the same stage, the same silence turning cruel, only this time he was the one standing close enough to do something about it. So when he stepped off the line, I actually thought, for one absurd second, that something dangerous was happening behind me. It wasn't. He crossed the floor in long, unhurried strides, the same pace he'd have used walking a parade ground, and 400 people who had been watching a child collapse turned instead to watch a soldier in a red tunic and a tall black bearskin cross an entire ballroom toward her. The silence changed shape. It went from cruel to confused to something else I didn't have a word for yet. He didn't speak first. He went down on one knee in front of her, armor and medals and 6 years of bearing, folding down to her height, and for a moment he just let her see his face up close, steady, unbothered, like none of this was strange at all. Up close, with 400 people watching and not one of them sure what they were watching, he looked less like a statue and more like exactly what he was, a young man who had decided something, and wasn't going to unmake the decision. He told her something. I was 20 feet back and the hall had gone so quiet I caught most of it. "You're not finishing this alone," he said. "I'm going to stand right here. You don't have to look at 400 people. Look at me. I've heard worse than a missed note. I've stood through artillery." A few people laughed, soft and real this time, the good kind. Pippa didn't. She just stared at him like she was deciding whether to trust the offer, the way children learn to weigh adults who make them promises, quickly, instinctively, and usually correctly. "I won't move," he said, when she still hadn't answered. "Not till you're done. Doesn't matter how long it takes." She looked past him once, at the silent room, then back at his face, and something in her settled. "Start wherever you left off," he said. "I'll be right here the whole time." She started the hymn again, second verse, voice thin as paper. He didn't sing, that would have been wrong, would have made it his moment instead of hers. He just stayed exactly where he'd knelt, eyes on her, steady as stone, the way he'd been trained to be steady for kings and funerals and men twice his rank shouting in his face. He lent her that. Not his voice. His stillness. Her second line came out stronger. Somewhere in the third verse her hands unclenched from each other and found the hem of her dress instead, twisting it, but no longer gripping it like something that might fall away from her. I watched her find the rhythm of it, not the song's rhythm, his. The pace of someone who has never once, in his life, had to hurry through a hard thing. By the fourth verse she'd found the tune again, thin but true, and something in that gilded room, donors who'd been half listening over their wine all night, went completely, fully silent in a way I had genuinely never heard in 19 years of working that hall. Not the brittle silence from before. The other kind. The kind that costs people something to give. I saw a man near the front, silver-haired, the sort who'd signed checks at every benefit for a decade without once looking up from his plate, set his fork down and simply watch. She finished the hymn. All 5 verses. Her voice cracked twice more and didn't stop again, because every time it wavered, Joran Vass simply held her eyes a half-second longer, and she found it, the way you'd find a handhold on a wall you'd been told you couldn't climb. The hall didn't clap. It rose. Every chair, every table, 400 people in formal wear getting to their feet at once, and the sound of that, not applause exactly, more like a held breath finally let go altogether, is the only sound from that night I still hear sometimes. He stood, gave her one short nod, the kind you'd give a fellow soldier who'd just held a line, and walked back to his post at the same unhurried pace he'd left it. Rifle at rest. Eyes forward. As if he hadn't just done the single thing I'd been told, in 19 years of working that hall, a king's guard does not do. The director of the home found me afterward, asking who he was, wanting to write a letter of thanks to his commanding officer. I didn't have his name yet myself. In 19 years I'd learned to recognize the guards by bearing, not by face, and that night I realized I couldn't have told you a single one of their names if asked. When I finally got it from the duty sergeant, I asked the obvious question, wasn't he going to be written up, a guard-breaking post in front of half the city's donors and the press cameras at the back of the hall? The sergeant just looked at me like I'd missed something obvious. Some orders exist to keep the line steady, he said. He kept the line steadier than it's ever been kept in this hall. There's nothing to write up. He paused, then added, quieter, almost to himself, 6 years I've watched that man hold a post through worse than this and never blink. First time I've seen him choose to move on his own, and he picked the one moment nobody in this building would have held it against him. Later, near the coat check, I saw him for a moment without his bearing, just a tired young man rubbing one gloved hand over his face, the crowd thinning around him, donors filing past offering handshakes he accepted with the same brisk economy he gave to everything. Pippa's matron brought her by to thank him properly, and the girl, emboldened now, asked him outright why he'd come. He crouched to her height again, the same easy economy of motion, and thought about it before answering, which told me the answer mattered to him. Because somebody should have, once, he said. And nobody did. She didn't fully understand that, I think, not that night. But she nodded like she'd file it away to understand later, the way children do with the things adults say that turn out, years on, to be the truest thing anyone ever told them. I have ushered that hall a long time, and I have seen money change hands that could rebuild whole city blocks, and speeches that moved grown men to tears they pretended were allergies. I have never seen 400 people go silent and then stand for a child's broken limb finished with the help of a soldier who wasn't supposed to move. He's back at his post every year now. Same doors, same bearing, same iron stillness the moment the benefit begins. The donors who were there that night still talk about it, in the careful, half-embarrassed way people talk about the one evening they were genuinely moved instead of merely entertained. A few have asked the home director, since, whether that guard could be invited back specifically, as though he were part of the program. He always is. He never explains why he comes early each year, or why he's the first to arrive and the last to leave the doors once the hall has emptied. Nobody watching him would guess what he carries, or what it cost him to step off that line once, or what it gave back to a girl who'd been about to learn, far too young, that nobody comes for you when you fail in public. Pippa sings every year now, by her own choice, better each time, though I don't think that's really the point anymore, for her or for him. I know better now, after 19 years, what that hall is actually for. So does she. And so, somewhere behind that unmoving face, does he.